The black SUV pulled up to the airport gate at exactly 11:47 p.m. Ibrahim Traoré stepped out, adjusting his military beret as the humid Lagos air hit his face. He wasn't to be here. Nobody knew he was coming to Nigeria, except 3 trusted men back in Burkina Faso. "Captain, the plane is ready," his bodyguard whispered, scanning the empty tarmac. Something felt wrong. The usual airport buzz was missing. No workers, no other planes, just silence. Traoré had received an urgent message 2 days ago. A high-ranking Nigerian official wanted to meet secretly. The message claimed they had information about a plot against his government, information that could save thousands of lives. As they walked toward the small private jet, Traoré noticed movement in the shadows. His hand instinctively moved to his sidearm. Years of military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every fiber of his being screamed danger. "Sir, we should leave," his second bodyguard muttered, his eyes darting between the dark hangars. But it was too late. Bright floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire area. Traoré squinted, temporarily blinded. When his vision cleared, he saw them, at least 20 armed men in civilian clothes, searching them from all sides. "President Traoré," a voice called out from behind the lights. "Welcome to Nigeria." The man who stepped forward wore an expensive suit despite the late hour. His smile was cold, calculated. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans regarding your meeting." Traoré's bodyguards reached for their weapons, but red laser dots immediately appeared on their chests. They froze. "Who are you?" Traoré demanded, his voice steady despite the situation. "Let's just say, I represent certain interests that find your recent activities problematic," the man replied. "Your little revolution in Burkina Faso has been inspiring other ideas across West Africa, ideas that some people find very inconvenient." The pieces clicked together in Traoré's mind. This wasn't about information. This was a trap. Someone wanted him removed from power, and they were using Nigeria as their staging ground. "You have 2 choices," the suited man continued. "Come with us quietly or we make this difficult for everyone." Traoré looked at his bodyguards. They were outnumbered 10-1, but surrender wasn't in his vocabulary. He had led coup against impossible odds before. "There's a third choice," Traoré said calmly. Before anyone could react, he pressed a small device hidden in his pocket. Suddenly the airport's emergency sirens began wailing. The floodlights flickered and died. In the confusion that followed, everything would change. But the suited man just smiled wider. "Captain, you really think we didn't expect that?" As the sirens wailed and the lights failed, Traoré dove behind a fuel truck. His bodyguards scattered in different directions, drawing fire away from him. Gunshots echoed across the tarmac. The device he had pressed wasn't just an alarm. It was a GPS beacon, transmitting his exact location to a network of allies across Africa, a network that most governments didn't even know existed. In Accra, Ghana, a former military colonel received the signal on his encrypted phone. Within minutes he was making calls to contacts in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. The message was simple: "Our brother needs help." Back at the airport, Traoré crawled beneath aircraft, using the darkness to his advantage. The Nigerian operatives were well trained, but they were hunting a man who had survived 3 different coups and countless assassination attempts. "He's moving toward Hangar 7, someone shouted in the distance. Traoré smiled grimly. Let them think that. He was actually heading in the opposite direction, toward the airport's maintenance tunnels. During his brief time in Nigerian military academies years ago, he had studied the layouts of major airports. That knowledge was about to save his life. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, Traoré's second-in-command received an emergency alert. The president had been missing for over an hour, and his last known location was Lagos. Within minutes, Burkina Faso's military was on high alert. But the real response was happening in places the kidnappers never expected. In small villages across Mali, Senegal and Niger, former soldiers who had served with Traoré began mobilizing. They called themselves the Brotherhood, and they had sworn an oath to protect each other long before Traoré became president. Back in the tunnels beneath Lagos Airport, Traoré found what he was looking for: an old maintenance shaft that led to the city's storm drain system. He could hear his pursuers above, their footsteps echoing through the hangar. His satellite phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. Package arriving in 30 minutes. East Side Drainage Canal. Come alone. Traoré hesitated. It could be another trap, but staying meant certain capture or death. He began crawling through the narrow shaft, his military training helping him navigate in complete darkness. Above ground, the suited man was growing frustrated. "How does one man just disappear?" he barked into his radio. "Sir, we're picking up unusual radio chatter," his communications officer reported. "Multiple frequencies, coded transmissions. It's like someone activated a network." The suited man's face went pale. He had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré. This wasn't just a regional president they were dealing with. This was a man who had built connections across an entire continent. As Traoré emerged from the drainage canal 2 miles from the airport, he saw headlights approaching. Friend or foe? In 30 seconds he would find out. The vehicle stopped, and a familiar voice called out in French, "Captain, we've been looking everywhere for you." The man who stepped out of the vehicle was Colonel Amadou Diallo, a former Senegalese Special Forces officer who had served alongside Traoré during peacekeeping missions years earlier. His presence meant the network was already in motion. "How did you get here so fast?" Traoré asked as they drove through Lagos's empty streets. "We have people everywhere, Captain. You trained us well." Diallo's radio crackled with updates in multiple languages. "Your disappearance triggered protocols across 7 countries. Right now there are phone calls happening in presidential palaces from Dakar to Nairobi." At that moment in Abuja, Nigeria's president was being woken up by frantic aides. Foreign ministers from multiple African nations were demanding explanations about why their colleague had vanished in Nigerian airspace. "What do you mean we have him?" The Nigerian president shouted. "I authorized no such operation." His intelligence chief shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, it appears to be a rogue operation. We're investigating." But the truth was more complicated. Powerful business interests, both African and foreign, had grown nervous about Traoré's influence. His success in Burkina Faso was inspiring similar movements across the continent. The last thing they wanted was a domino effect of military leaders who put their countries first. Meanwhile, Traoré and Diallo reached a safe house in Lagos's diplomatic quarter. Inside, they found representatives from 6 different countries, all connected through various liberation movements and military networks built over decades. "The situation is escalating," reported a woman from Chad. 3 presidents have officially demanded your release. Social media is exploding with hashtags calling for your freedom. "This isn't just about me anymore," Traoré realized. "They've made this a continental issue." Outside the safe house, Nigerian security forces were setting up checkpoints throughout the city. But they weren't looking for Traoré anymore. They were trying to contain a diplomatic crisis that was spiraling out of control. The suited man from the airport was now in a secure room, arguing frantically on multiple phones. "You said this would be quiet. Now half of Africa is watching." His handlers weren't pleased. What was supposed to be a simple extraction had become an international incident. Even worse, they were learning that Traoré's network extended far beyond anything they had imagined. In Burkina Faso, thousands of citizens had gathered outside government buildings demanding answers about their president's whereabouts. Similar protests were forming in Ghana, Mali, and Senegal. The hashtag Find Traoré was trending across Africa. "We need to move you out of Nigeria tonight," Diallo advised. "But every airport and border is being watched." Traoré studied the map on the table. His military mind was already working on solutions. "What about the harbor?" "Too obvious. They'll expect that. Then we don't use the obvious route." Traoré pointed to a location on the coast. "There's an old smuggling route I learned about during counter-terrorism operations. It runs through Benin." The woman from Chad shook her head. "That's incredibly dangerous. If you're caught crossing illegally, it gives them justification for anything they want to do. And if I stay here, I'm definitely caught," Traoré replied. "Sometimes the most dangerous option is the safest one." As they planned the escape route, none of them knew that the real game was just beginning. The forces behind the kidnapping attempt weren't ready to give up, and they had resources that extended far beyond Nigeria's borders. At 3 a.m., a fishing boat left Lagos harbor carrying what appeared to be 3 local fishermen. In reality, it was Traoré and 2 guides who knew every creek and inlet along the West African coast. The boat moved slowly, its engine barely above idle to avoid detection. Nigerian naval patrols were focused on the main shipping lanes, not the maze of waterways used by generations of smugglers. But as they approached the Benin border, Traoré's satellite phone vibrated with an urgent message. "They know about the boat," Diallo's voice crackled through the encrypted channel. "Nigerian forces are mobilizing coastal units. You have maybe 20 minutes before they reach your position." The lead guide, an elderly man named Kofi, overheard the conversation. "There's a mangrove channel ahead. Very narrow, but it connects to a river system. We can lose them there." As they changed course, Traoré couldn't help but admire the irony. The same smuggling routes used to move illegal goods were now helping to move Africa's most wanted man to safety. Behind them, searchlights began scanning the water. Military speedboats were approaching fast, their engines roaring through the night silence. The chase was on. "Kill the engine," Kofi whispered as they entered the mangrove channel. "From here we paddle." The narrow waterway was barely wide enough for their small boat. Overhanging branches created a natural tunnel, hiding them from aerial surveillance, but it also meant they were trapped if the military boats found the entrance. For 30 minutes they paddled in complete silence. Mosquitoes swarmed around them, and the smell of swamp gas filled their nostrils. Traoré had been in worse situations, but never as a fugitive in a foreign country. "There's something you should know," Kofi said quietly as they paddled. "The people trying to catch you, they offered $1 million for information about escape routes, but nobody in these villages will take their money."
"Why not?"
Traoré asked, genuinely curious. "Because everyone here has heard about what you did in Burkina Faso. How you kicked out the foreign companies that were stealing our resources. People are hoping you'll inspire their own leaders to do the same." Meanwhile, in the capital cities across West Africa, emergency meetings were taking place. The African Union was calling for an urgent session. Several countries were threatening to recall their ambassadors from Nigeria if Traoré wasn't found safely. The suited man was now facing pressure from multiple directions. His phone rang constantly with updates and demands from his superiors. The simple kidnapping had become a continental crisis, and he was running out of options. "Sir, we've lost the trail," his field commander reported. "They disappeared into the mangrove system. It's like a maze down there." "Then drain every swamp if you have to," the suited man snarled. "This cannot become a success story. If Traoré escapes, it proves that our methods don't work. It encourages others to resist." But Traoré was already thinking 3 moves ahead. As their boat finally emerged into Benin's territorial waters, he was planning not just his escape, but his response. Someone had tried to remove him from power, and that meant war. "Contact the Brotherhood," he told Diallo over the satellite phone. "It's time they learned what happens when you threaten an African leader who refuses to bow down." The real confrontation was just beginning. By dawn, Traoré was in a secure compound in Cotonou, Benin's largest city. But he wasn't hiding anymore. Within hours of his arrival, something unprecedented began happening across West Africa. Bank accounts belonging to foreign mining companies suddenly froze. Import licenses for luxury goods were mysteriously delayed. Government contracts with international firms faced routine reviews that would take months to complete. "How is this possible?" the suited man demanded during an emergency video conference with his superiors. "You underestimated their network," came the reply from a voice he couldn't see. "These aren't just military connections. They've built economic alliances across the continent." The truth was becoming clear. For years, while foreign powers had focused on traditional diplomatic and economic pressure, African leaders had been quietly building their own systems of mutual support. In Ghana, the president announced that his country would review all mining contracts with companies that had operations in Nigeria. In Senegal, port authorities began conducting enhanced inspections of cargo ships owned by the same corporations that had funded Traoré's kidnapping attempt. "This is economic warfare," an analyst in London reported to his clients. "They're using trade and investment flows as weapons." Meanwhile, Traoré was coordinating the response from his temporary headquarters. Maps covered the walls, showing trade routes, mining operations, and financial flows across the continent. It looked less like a military command center and more like a corporate boardroom. Every dollar they tried to use against us, we can redirect, he explained to Diallo. Every contract they depend on, we can delay. Every permit they need, we can review. But the other side wasn't giving up easily. Reports began filtering in of unusual military movements near Benin's borders. Pressure was building on Benin's government to extradite Traoré. They're offering Benin a massive aid package, his intelligence contact reported. Development funds, military equipment, trade agreements. They want you handed over. Traoré smiled grimly. Then it's time for the next phase. He picked up a secure phone and made a call to South Africa, then another to Kenya, then Egypt. Within hours, a pattern emerged that would shock international observers. African stock markets began moving in coordinated ways. Currency exchange rates shifted. Most importantly, several countries simultaneously announced reviews of their relationships with international financial institutions. What are they doing? The suited man's superior demanded. They're proving a point, came the analysis. They're showing that Africa doesn't need permission to protect its own leaders. In European capitals, emergency meetings were called. The situation had evolved beyond a simple kidnapping into something approaching continental economic rebellion. But Traoré wasn't done. His next move would demonstrate just how deep his network reached, and how seriously other African leaders took threats against their sovereignty. The phone call he made next would change everything. The call was to President Félix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Within an hour, Congo announced the temporary suspension of cobalt exports to companies with Nigerian operations. Since Congo produces 70% of the world's cobalt, essential for electric vehicle batteries, the announcement sent shockwaves through global markets. This is insane, the suited man's handler said during their emergency meeting. One kidnapping attempt is affecting global supply chains. But Traoré was just getting started. The next call went to President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. Soon after, South African ports began experiencing routine maintenance delays that affected ships carrying goods for the third companies involved in the kidnapping plot. The message was clear: touch one African leader, and you might find yourself dealing with an entire continent. In Lagos, the suited man was watching his career collapse in real time. Stock prices for his clients' companies were dropping by the hour. International investors were demanding explanations for the African coordination that was affecting their operations. We need to end this now, he told his team. Release a statement saying we have no idea where Traoré is. Distance ourselves from the entire operation. But it was too late for that approach. Intelligence services across Africa had been documenting everything: phone records, financial transfers, travel documents. They had evidence of the entire conspiracy. Meanwhile, in Cotonou, Traoré was preparing for the most audacious move yet. He was going to hold a press conference. Sir, that's incredibly dangerous, Diallo warned. The moment you show your face, they'll know exactly where you are. That's the point, Traoré replied. I want them to know where I am. I want them to know that I'm not hiding anymore. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. local time. International media outlets received invitations, but so did intelligence agencies from multiple countries. Everyone would be watching. At exactly 2 p.m., Traoré walked onto a stage in central Cotonou. Behind him stood flags from 12 African nations. The symbolism was unmistakable. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. 3 days ago, I was invited to Nigeria for what I believed was a diplomatic meeting, he began, his voice calm but firm. Instead, I found myself the target of a kidnapping attempt orchestrated by Vine interests who want to control African resources and African leaders. Camera flashes lit up the room. This was the first time anyone had publicly confirmed the kidnapping attempt. But what happened next should serve as a lesson to anyone who thinks they can intimidate African leaders who put their people first, Traoré continued. Within hours, my brothers and sisters across this continent demonstrated we are no longer isolated targets. He paused, letting the words sink in. We have built networks of mutual support that span from Dakar to Nairobi, from Cairo to Cape Town. Attack one of us, and you attack all of us. In intelligence centers across 3 continents, analysts were frantically taking notes. This was a declaration of a new form of African unity, one based not on formal treaties, but on shared resistance to outside interference. But Traoré's next statement would be the one that truly shocked the world. Now I have a message for those who thought they could remove me from power. The age of easy manipulation of African leaders is over, Traoré declared to the packed press conference. What you witnessed over the past 3 days was just a preview of what happens when you threaten our Urzi. He held up a document. This is a mutual defense pact, signed by representatives from 15 African nations, not a defense against military invasion, but against economic coercion, political interference, and attempts to remove democratically chosen leaders. The room erupted. This was unprecedented, a formal alliance specifically designed to counter foreign interference in African politics. From today forward, Traoré continued, any attempt to destabilize an African government through kidnapping, assassination, or economic pressure will trigger coordinated continental responses. Your mining rights, your trade agreements, your development projects, all of it becomes subject to collective African review. In the intelligence centers monitoring the broadcast, the implications were immediately clear. Africa had just announced it was changing the rules of engagement. The suited man, watching from his Lagos office, knew his career was over. But more than that, he knew that the entire approach his organization had used for decades was now obsolete. They've weaponized African unity, he reported to his superiors. Every pressure point we used to use individually, they can now counter collectively. But Traoré wasn't finished. His final announcement would be the most significant of all. I am returning to Burkina Faso tomorrow, he declared. Not in secret, not in hiding, but on a plane provided by the African Union, accompanied by representatives from 12 nations. Anyone who wants to try to stop us is welcome to explain their actions to the entire continent. The next day, as promised, a convoy of aircraft took off from Cotonou. The lead plane carried Traoré, but it was flanked by jets from Ghana, Senegal, Mali, and four countries. The message was unmistakable. He was under continental protection. The suited man and his handlers could only watch as the convoy flew safely through Nigerian airspace. Nigerian authorities, facing mounting pressure from multiple governments, had quietly agreed to guarantee safe passage. When Traoré landed in Ouagadougou, hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets. But the celebration wasn't just about his return, it was about what his escape had revealed. 3 days ago they thought they could remove me quietly, Traoré told the cheering crowd from the steps of the presidential palace. Instead, they accidentally showed the world that Africa has changed. We are no longer individual countries that can be picked off one by one. We are a continent that protects its own. In the months that followed, the effects of those 3 days continued to ripple across Africa. The Mutual Defense Pact was formalized and expanded. Economic cooperation agreements multiplied. Most importantly, other attempts at foreign interference found themselves facing coordinated continental resistance. The suited man eventually found himself testifying before multiple parliamentary committees, trying to explain how a simple kidnapping had triggered what experts were calling Africa's second independence movement. But for Ibrahim Traoré, walking through the streets of Ouagadougou as a free man, the real victory wasn't his escape. It was the proof that when African leaders stood together, they were tough. The kidnappers had intended to demonstrate Africa's weakness. Instead, they had revealed its hidden strength. And across the continent, in presidential palaces and village squares, people were asking the same question. If they could coordinate to save one leader, what else could they accomplish together? The answer to that question would reshape Africa for generations to come.